Sam, thanks so much for joining me here on the Mark Divine Show today. Super stoked to have you. How are you, sir?
Doing well. Glad to be here, and thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure. I'm really excited to talk to you. But before we started, we were talking about you being in New Haven, Connecticut, sitting in a classroom at Yale. Here we are, 2 weeks ish before the presidential election.
Yeah,
and I want to talk about like the state of anxiety in our schools and our nation. And what is your kind of take on the level of anxiety and fear and kind of how that's playing into psychological issues that's really seems to be ballooning in this country?
Yeah, well, the rates of depression and anxiety and most forms of mental illness have unfortunately gone up quite a bit,
Right.
really for the last 10 years. And there's likely a lot of factors that are driving that. One does seem to be this, there's especially at places like where I am now at Yale University, and almost an existential dread.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of factors play into that.
Right.
The polarization in politics and society broadly definitely doesn't help with that.
Yeah, I don't even know where to begin to unpack that. It's surprising that it's been going on for over 10 years, though, right? It seems like it really accelerated with COVID. And, I think ultimately fear has to do with a loss of sense of control. And I say that word sense deliberately because I don't think anyone really has control over anything besides ultimately how they perceive the world and how they react. And that's if they do a little bit of work, right?
Yeah.
So the sense of lack of control has been slipping away because the narratives have been, the narratives of what it meant to be, human and what it means to be, like, say, an American in our case, they're really dramatically shifting. And so people's center is like been tilted in a lot of different directions. Let me, you're an expert in depression and the psychology of how to like break free from that. And there's so many ways to look at that. Let me start by talking about my personal situation, right? So I believe that I have experienced kind of low-grade depression. And it's because I grew up in a traumatic kind of family situation, a lot of alcoholism, a lot of anger, emotional abuse, and probably, because of that, withheld love as a child. And I compensated with that with extreme exercise. Heck, I became a Navy SEAL. They couldn't hurt me in the SEAL training program, right? And then, of course, alcohol helped with that as well. But my sense is that my brain, and I think there's some research to this, I'm not really clued in on 100%, but when an individual experiences that kind of trauma as a child, the brain doesn't produce enough of the feel-good hormones like serotonin and dopamine. And this is one of the reasons why exercise has been so helpful for me. But I guess where I'm going with this is there a physiological basis of anxiety and depression emanating from childhood trauma?
There definitely is. My field still has a lot of work to do to untangle what exactly is depression, and there's likely many different forms, but trauma, neglect, difficult circumstances, stress. Now I'll caveat that a little bit because some stress is good and
of course, yeah.
Challenges that we overcome and that are time limited help build resilience and confidence. Right. But if it's unpredictable stress for a long time, high intensity, and the person gives up, then that is harmful to people's psychological well-being. So there's a number of factors, and early childhood as well as adolescence are critical times when, as much as possible, we want to stabilize and reinforce, provide love and nurturing and
right.
and warm relationships as young people develop.
Right. In the stress lexicon, you have the acute stress, which is like a shock, like a really traumatizing event, like a car accident or the loss of a loved one. And then you have the chronic, which is the over time. It's just this kind of, it could be just hyperarousal from, conditions in the household or anything like that. How do these differ in the context of contributing to anxiety or depression? Let me just add some color. It would seem like if you're relatively have relatively normal development, that an acute stress could actually be a resilience builder, right? Whereas long-term chronic stress is what would be really debilitating in terms of anxiety and leading into kind of depressive symptoms.
Yeah, and a lot of this, especially when we refer to long-term stress, has to do with a concept that it's academic lingo, but something called learned helplessness, which is basically where and some of this is dependent on a person's attitude and expectations and mindset, that if you get into your head that, look, nothing I do is going to make a difference, I may as well just roll over and give up, then that is, it's in a way a self-fulfilling prophecy. Not that all you need to do is pull up your bootstraps and buck up and so forth. I mean, I'm a big proponent of doing that, of pulling up your bootstraps, but there are other, it's a complicated interplay between, an individual's attitude as well as their kind of own individual makeup, genetically, neurocircuitry wise and so forth, as well as the environment. So lots of different factors, but ultimately chronic, unpredictable, high level intensity stress is not good, because it raises the probability that someone's just going to say, there's nothing I can do. Nothing I do seems to make a difference. That's what is referred to in psychology as learned helplessness.
I could tell from reading your background that you have a orientation toward Eastern psychology and consciousness studies that maybe are juxtaposed to the traditional Western scientific materialistic viewpoint. And I know that's a generalization, but that's leading to my next question. At what level do you think karmic forces, the energy that an individual's soul brings into an incarnation, could play into whether that individual has a life of anxiety and depression or is, free, so to speak?
Well, I think the most I can speak of this has to do with my writing and thinking around free will. I definitely think there's a lot to be learned from Eastern traditions and so forth. Certainly, I believe that our decisions are shaped in large respect by the circumstances in which we find ourselves. But there is also an individual, a personal component to, how you react, how you choose to either face or run away from or whatever, how you handle with a number of different challenges. One of my favorite books and one of my, I guess, professional heroes was a psychiatrist named Viktor Frankl. And
Sure.
He wrote a very influential, it still sells very well, influential book called Man's Search for Meaning.
Right.
And he wrote this book in a very short period of time following his liberation from a concentration camp during the Holocaust. He was Jewish and like so many others suffered a terrible experience during that camp. And his experience, although difficult, he noticed that even in those very, very difficult circumstances, that a man could choose, a man or woman, could choose how he responded to these difficult circumstances. He observed men that would give away their last morsel of bread to a neighbor, to a fellow man or friend. And he observed those who, in those difficult circumstances, just doubled down on their selfishness.
Right.
And that even in those very limited circumstances, that there was still an aspect of choice, and that a person could influence the type of being that they were becoming.
That's amazing. I love his work. I think he called his therapy logotherapy. Am I right?
Yeah.
And like to boil it down, I mean, you express it really well. It's just basically if you can turn your eye toward service, right? Turn your eye to your fellow human being, take it off yourself, and in that moment, you'll be generating some positive energy, right? Which in repeated acts of that kind of service and kindness can be uplifting, and those who did that in the concentration camp survived, and those who didn't. And so I guess my question here is how does this relate to free will? Is Victor saying you have the free will? Or is he only saying only those who can find themselves serving others in those most dire circumstances have free will?
No,
And
his
in other words,
writings
is free will free? Is it accessible to everybody?
his writing was very much in favor of, look, free will is a real thing, and we need to recognize it and teach people that as you probably know, this is in some circles this is a controversial area. And when I say in some circles, most people go around their daily lives with the assumption that I can do the things that I choose and so forth, and I believe that's true to some extent. Certainly culture and the people you surround yourself and habits, these all play into it. But the best level evidence that I've read is that behavior, even in relatively simple organisms, behavior is not deterministic, which means that there's a level of unpredictability there. And this, I think, is in part, I think that's a critical part of what we refer to as free will.
Right. And I think that gets into the intentionality, like Heisenberg principles, or the observer paradox, or the way you observe something will change, the behavior of the thing that you're observing.
Yes. This reminds me of a great, if you don't mind, just
of course,
the quip in academics is that you have Heisenberg and he's driving along and he gets pulled over by a cop, and the cop asks him, "Do you know how fast you were going?" He says, No, I don't, but I know where I am. And he says, "Well, you're going 80 miles an hour." And he goes, "Oh, great. Now I'm lost."
I love it. That's awesome.
Oh.
Yeah.
I got that from there's a professor at Stanford, Robert Sapolsky, a great writer.
And most academics probably don't love the Heisenberg principle, because it basically says that all research is biased ultimately from the positionality of the researcher.
Well, I mean, at certain levels, right? I mean, I think that's true at many levels, that when you, certainly with people and apparently with electrons, when you observe them, they behave somewhat differently, and in other areas of research, that's maybe less true or less applicable. But it's certainly, I think, through the scientific world it threw them a curveball when they realize, oh, this may not be a totally deterministic system after all. Right.
Yeah, it's a puzzle, right? For the last few years, I've been puzzling over this concept of free will, because, I have a deep meditation practice, and, I more and more come to experience what some of the yogis and Eastern philosophers like Krishnamurti and Ramana Maharshi talk about, in that, from the non-dual perspective, everything is consciousness, and we are instruments of consciousness. So we perceive consciousness from our unique perspective, but it's a universal subjectivity. It's not an individual subjectivity, meaning that, that's the universal perspective. But simultaneously, I mean, the Advaita says it's not two. Duality and non-duality are not two. So simultaneously, we have this body, mind, and brain that has the conditioning and the training and the environmental conditions, as well as maybe karmic energy conditions that cause that limited perspective of universal consciousness to be radically unique, and so therefore it's taken to be an individual consciousness. An individual sense of self. And that's what the Buddha said, that is the cause of suffering. That's the cause of suffering, to think that that it's an illusion that you are an individual separate self with an individual consciousness. And so from the perspective of the Eastern traditions, there is no free will. Everything is universal consciousness, but it's being played out through the conditioning of that body-mind, the individual body-mind. And that's just a positionality. Mm-hmm. But from the perspective of duality, you have a sense of being an individual self, and that sense also includes the sense of having a free will.
Yeah.
I know. What do you say about that? It's confusing. How do you rectify those?
I would probably agree more with the latter. I certainly, and the thing that I would maybe does resonate with me from the first is that we do have this individuality and this free will, but one of the things that's interesting about human nature is that we're not very good at predicting. We're surprisingly poor judges at predicting what circumstances and situations and activities are going to be rewarding to us. So this is something in psychology that's called affective forecasting. You're forecasting how are you going to feel, your mood state in a given situation. And there's this great psychology research article from the 1970s that really epitomizes this. It has this provocative title that is accident victims and lottery winners. Okay, so it compares these two groups. Sometime after this pivotal event happened, either they got in a terrible accident and were left paraplegic, or they won the lottery and were rich. And after some time, their kind of levels of mood more or less go back to where they were. And really there wasn't any difference between the groups in the ability for the people in each group to feel reward from everyday tasks and so forth. So we think that, if I could just get a nicer car, a bigger house, a 20% pay raise, then I would be satisfied. Then I would be happy. And there's a time when that's true. And for 2, 3, 4 weeks, whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
you're
It's not lasting.
Mood, your mood improves. You're feeling better. But then you go back to kind of your set point, and you just kind of want more and more and more. Nature did not prepare us well to live in times of relative abundance. Now, the one of the exceptions to this is relationships. A warm and uplifting relationship, and by the way, relationships for better and for worse. A warm, uplifting relationship really does, in a sustained way, elevate your happiness, well-being, mood, set point, whatever word you want to call it. What we consider this is the good life. The relationships really do affect that, and the counterpart to that, though, is that a really difficult, negative, toxic relationship will also persistently decrease your happiness and well-being and so forth, and just eats away at your psychological state of mind.
So much of what we want to do can seem impossible. What are your grand ambitions, your greatest goals? The highest achievers among us are those still striving, reaching for something big, the ones who want to keep climbing higher. And for those with that adventurous spirit, there's a vehicle for you. It's called the Defender. The Defender is engineered to meet challenges head on. It's an icon reimagined through thoroughly modern design. With its compelling proportions and precise detailing, the Defender exudes confidence on and off the road. It's got a tough, rigid body design, and its durable, lightweight architecture provides extra strength, which can help you tackle any terrain and any weather. Whether you choose the Defender 90, the 110, or 130, which can seat up to 8, you'll have a vehicle that's ready to explore your way. With legendary capability and robust material design, that Defender gives you the confidence to embrace the impossible and push beyond your perceived limits. Explore their full lineup at LandRoverUSA.com. LandRoverUSA.com. Start your next adventure today with the Defender.
So, can one... Again, it's such a complex topic, but most, we come into this world not choosing our relationships.
Yep.
Again, unless you are willing to accept the prospect that our higher power or our, spiritual self, architected the situation, chose the parents to, learn certain lessons or to be able to fulfill a certain destiny or dharma. And I choose that, right? That's kind of my belief system, but again, I don't have any direct proof of it. But so we come in, and I'll use my example. Like I, came in and my family was my family, and there was a lot of chaos, a lot of negativity, and then the friends were my friends from my environment. It really wasn't until I was a full adult in my 20s where I started to recognize that I could choose. But I don't think a lot of people ever break out of those initial environments where they can choose, truly choose, like with what we're talking about, free will. And when I say free will, I mean fully autonomous, free from conditioning, free from, the subconscious trauma-induced patterns that drive most of human behavior, right? I don't think you really have free will. I think you think you do, but you're acting on some sort of algorithm that's been conditioned into you based upon that early environmental conditions.
Yeah. But just a couple of thoughts. I also believe there was some element of choice before we were born. I don't have scientific level proof of that, but my particular religious belief has this notion that somehow we chose to be here.
Right.
I don't know if we chose a particular family or what. I mean, it's hard to think, why would someone choose to be in this terrible situation?
Yeah,
but
I've had that thought several times. Why did I choose?
But certainly that this was an important part of our overall growth and development, that we chose to be here, and that there's a purpose to our existence. Now, going back to this issue of free will, in many ways I agree. Sometimes people think, free will has to be totally independent from other factors, whatever. I don't think that's quite right, because if your decisions had nothing to do with your past experiences and so forth, that would nullify the concept of a self, right? A person that decides in a totally random way, and there's no room for personality, there's no room for consistency of self over time. So I certainly think our choices are influenced in very strong ways by past experience, by environment. But I think there is a room for you to make a genuine decision. And I wonder also if there's not really such thing as free will in a vacuum, that there's not really choice unless you have two or more competing options.
Interesting.
You have to be pulled in one direction or another. And this is critical to what I think one of the reasons I'm on here is I have a book that came out earlier in 2024 about what I think is a framework that science provides us that might give a little hint at what is the meaning and purpose of our existence. And I think choice is a big part of that. I think the way that nature has shaped us, leaves us pulled in different directions. And in many ways, we refer to this as good and evil. We have capacities for selfishness, but also altruism, aggression, but also cooperation, and so forth. And depending on our choices, as well as the environments in which we find ourselves and in which we place ourselves, this determines kind of the trajectories that we choose, the life paths that unfold before us. And I think that in that way, there's this cliche motif, right, of a cartoon character that has a little angel on one shoulder and a little devil on the other shoulder. And I think in some ways that's maybe truer to life than we often realize.
Yeah, and actually it fits perfectly with the East-West dichotomy, right? Because the angel could easily be pure consciousness enlivening our existence, and the devil is the ego, right? And so, or from Freud's, ego, id, and like super consciousness, super conscious really is the non-personal universal consciousness that is love. Yeah. And the ego is everything that's less than that. It's the split mind that, lives in a dualistic good, bad, up, down, left, right, time-denominated reality where we're constantly chasing things that bring us pleasure and running away from things that we fear or that are, cause us suffering.
Yeah.
And so that's, when it comes to free will, you could say it is that higher self or that super conscious or that, the universal consciousness, the spirit that runs through all things from the native tradition's perspective, that is nudging us toward the good, nudging us toward the life and affirming actions.
Yeah.
Whereas the ego, which is completely designed and rooted in our natural instinctual selves, is always going to choose the path of least resistance to survival, which is often the wrong choice, right? Or pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
So your book, Purpose, What Evolution and Human Nature Imply About the Meaning of Our Existence. So I guess based upon this recent kind of thread, how can we prove that we have a higher purpose? Is there any way for an individual to like come to move beyond kind of belief to like certainty that we have a higher purpose or a higher self even?
It's a good question, and I think that's a personal question. I don't know that I can provide evidence that is irrefutable that there's a purpose for life. What I'm trying to do here is provide a framework where I'm trying to provide a framework that goes against this long-running perception that science and biology, in particular evolution, implies that we have no purpose, that life is meaningless. Any purpose that we concoct is purely an illusion. I'm trying to push against that and provide an alternative framework and a competing framework where, no, actually, when you bring these things together, what do we find meaning in? We find meaning in relationships, and it seems like we're designed by that way. And most importantly, we find meaning in close personal and sometimes family relationships. And this concept of choice between good and evil. I think the way that nature has shaped us is that scientists have argued for a long time, what is at the root of human nature? Are we ultimately, altruistic or selfish? I think we have both capacities within our flesh. Okay, and there's interesting evidence, or there's interesting cases from biology where, actually, it looks like nature shaped not only a survival of the fittest individual that would have led to selfishness, but a survival of the fittest group or family that led to the opposite of selfishness, cooperation and altruism and so forth. So I can't prove beyond a doubt. And I don't think it was designed by that. I honestly think that on purpose there was room for choice of belief.
Right.
And whether you're going to believe one system or one framework rather, or another.
And do you think, again, getting to the question of whether evolution was strictly biological survival of the fittest, or was it, whether it was divinely inspired, is that, again, back to that choice? Could that choice be the divine inspiration?
I think there's room for that. So if I can, I'll share just a little bit. I decided to write this book when I was younger. I was a medical student, and I studied engineering, so I didn't have a ton of exposure to biology. I did the required courses to get into medical school, but it was that during that first year of medical school, I don't know why exactly, because I had heard of evolution and studied a little bit, but so many of the faculty, the professors there, just keep referring back to it, and I thought about it, and it bothered me. Right? It was like, does this go against what, the sense that I have, that most people have, that life has purpose and value and meaning? Because on the surface, it seemed to. And when I dug further, I uncovered a number of principles that were really satisfying to me. The reason I wrote the book is to try to provide a framework for people who struggle with similar challenges of, what does biology actually really imply? What does evolution imply about us, about our existence, about a purpose or lack thereof of existence? And one of the things that I didn't like was this sense that it was a totally random and haphazard process. I think a lot of lay people, when they think of evolution, they think, that's totally random. We just happen to be here. Good for us. I'm grateful, but there's not really a higher purpose, because if you could rewind the tape of life, a billion years or so, and watch it unfold again, a totally different result would have come about. And I think there's a lot of evidence that that's not exactly the case. There are these patterns that recur over and over and over and over again in evolution that point to deeper structures or constraints or higher laws that have guided or shaped this process to go in some ways and not others. And many of there are a number of vocal atheists that are biologists that have said evolution totally dispels any notion of God and so forth. And they would agree. They would agree that this was not a random process. They would bristle at theological implications that I'm trying to draw, but they would agree, yes, this is definitely not a random process. There's something here. We don't understand exactly what it is, but but there's some forces, some laws of nature, whatever that have constrained the process to go in some directions and not others.
Right. And so if we were to take this to the individual level, you believe that every individual has a unique purpose, or they can construct a unique purpose through some thoughtful effort?
Yeah, I think there's at least two levels here. I think there's a general purpose, and I think for pretty much everyone who has a certain level of cognitive capacity, I think one of the reasons that we are here is to choose between the good and evil within us. I think all of us in our bodies have capacity for a variety of traits that we generally categorize as good and evil. I think that's a general purpose. Okay. But at the individual level, yes, I think people can find great meaning and in an individual level purpose. And whether that's, you found a particular talent that you excel at, and you develop that talent and use it not just to help yourself, but to help others, that often provides a great source of meaning and satisfaction. So I think that there's both levels, and I think at a general level, for people who have a minimum level of cognitive capacity, I think one of the reasons we're here is to choose between good and evil. But then there's different individual purposes for all of us that are in some ways up to our making.
It's kind of funny what's going through my mind right now. You said a minimum cognitive level. You have the capacity to choose between good and evil, which means, generally you would want to choose more good than evil. But why is most of humanity choosing, the opposite? Right?
Well, there's a number of reasons. I think one, the pull of selfishness is strong. Right. And then the two, another reason I alluded to is that we're not good at predicting what is going to be rewarding.
So we don't know what's good.
Well, we're bad at predicting what's going to bring us happiness, and ultimately, my belief is that goodness will bring happiness. That and there is data to show that service, helping others, and so forth, that is very rewarding. Right. But most of us don't go around thinking, if I could just find another person to help today, then can you imagine how the world would be different if we did think that? Right. It'd be great. But so, I think this is maybe what we're taught when we're told to lean not unto our own understanding, right? Is to try to remind. And this is one of the reasons that I go to church on a regular basis. I need to remember, okay, it's not the money, it's not the fame, it's not the prestige, it's not the status, it's my relationships that are going to be rewarding. And what do I need to do in my life to put those at the top of the priority list?
Right. In your book, in your work, are you prescriptive in any manner? I mean, you've already talked about obviously seeking good relationships and finding, purpose and moving toward the good, but we have difficulty knowing what that is. But for an individual listening to this, they'd be like, yeah, Professor Wilkinson's got some great ideas. How does it apply to me? Where do we go with that?
Yeah. So there are two things, and they're going to sound maybe a little old-fashioned, but I think the data really back them up, and that two of the factors, the modifiable factors, meaning something that you can do something about, not like your genetics, but the factors that most lead to well-being, happiness, and are good for staving off depression and anxiety and so forth. One is marriage, okay, and long-term partnership, marriage, and the other actually is religious participation. So there are very noticeable, observable, tangible benefits to being part of a religious organization, and this, I think this trickles down to non-religious organizations to some degree, and being part of Rotary Club, whatever, some shared group in which you're contributing to something greater than yourself. I think that carries a lot of the benefits, but there seems to be something somewhat unique about religious organizations that when people are a part of them, they seem to experience really tangible benefits.
In a perfect world, we'd all get enough of the nutrients we need for high-level performance from our diets alone. But this is the real world, and it's not perfect. And truth is, everyone could use some help in continuing to find a new personal best day after day. And that means you need supplementation. For me, the first step has been nailing the basics. The momentous three are my go-to: protein, creatine, and omega-3. These are the three nutrients expert research shows as the foundation of long-term health. And if taken daily, this protocol supports every cellular function of the brain and body, from muscle recovery and growth to focus and energy. The momentous three is the easiest way to drive the biggest impact on your health span. Momentous takes it a step further, though. As a supplement company determined to bring trust and transparency to a space that lacks both, all their formulas are designed with human performance experts and are NSF and Informed Sport certified for use by professional and collegiate athletes. That means sourcing ingredients for quality, not just what's cheapest, and what's on the label is exactly what you're getting. They're driven by what they call the momentous standard, and it's become synonymous with the industry gold standard in quality and efficacy. So, if you're interested in making a true investment in your health, why not join the best in human performance and be part of the change in raising the bar on supplementation? Go to livemomentous.com and use the code DIVINE, D-I-V-I-N-E, for 20% off your new routine today. Again, that's Live Momentous, LIVEMOMENTOUS.com. Use that code DIVINE. Thank you, Momentous, for sponsoring the Mark Divine Show.
I'm curious, because you're an expert in depression, can someone be happy and depressed at the same time? Yeah, I mean, because my experience is I'm happy. I've been happy. The only time I wasn't happy was when I was completely having an existential crisis myself in my early 20s, which led to a complete shift in everything. But, like, I've had periods of, not feeling great, but I wasn't not happy.
Yeah. So a lot of this depends on how you define your terms. And these terms, we throw them around all the time, but they're kind of vague. Like, what is depression and what is happiness? There's a lot of researchers who don't like happiness. They'll use the term well-being.
Right.
So can you have, relatively high well-being and really severe depression? I think if the severity, I think it's really hard to have both at high levels.
Yes.
So to be severely depressed.
It's too capturing.
And intensely happy. Yeah. I don't know that I've ever seen a person that would fit that description. But certainly kind of low levels of depression and things that and some of this may have to do with, again, childhood experiences, adverse childhood experiences that kind of still are lingering in the background. But again, most of the time, most days, generally happy, feeling mostly fulfilled. So that is possible when the levels of intensity are not at the extreme.
Yeah. And do you work with clients, or are you mostly a research psychologist?
I'm mostly a researcher, but I do see patients. I mean, my research is clinically focused. It's running clinical trials, and then I a couple hours a week I do a private practice.
Okay. So in your private work, how have you, or what have you seen to be most effective to help individuals discover, access what they believe to be their higher purpose? This is something that we struggle with in our end too.
Yeah, it's a good question because, well, it's very individualized, right? And traditionally, my field, as well as kind of therapy, is, at least we're taught not to necessarily be directive, not to tell people you need to go do this and it will make you better, but to kind of what is it that is meaningful and valuable to them. There are definitely surveys, though, that we tend to, as a field, we tend to sometimes skip over things that are probably more meaningful to people than we would think. And again, one of the things that comes to mind is religion. Psychiatry, psychology. For a long time, there's been this sense we don't really ask about that. But obviously, for many people, it's very important and meaningful. And I think we probably should. And again, not necessarily in a directive way, like, if only you went to church, you're probably would be better. Now, that's probably not a helpful comment, but is there something in there? Did they used to have a religious community? Maybe they don't anymore because of COVID or whatever. Maybe you could nudge, oh, is that something you want to think about? If no, okay, that's fine. So I don't have a, magic bullet for, this seems to help everyone that I've seen, because people are just so different.
Right.
Human beings from one to another. Certainly we are, we have a shared humanity, but the reasons for a person's depression or anxiety are very individual.
Right. I think you just described the difference between psychology and psychotherapy, because psychotherapy will be prescriptive, like cognitive behavioral therapy, change your behaviors here, and it should lead to, subjective shifts in your perspectives there.
I guess I'll walk that back and say, for major life decisions, we're taught not to be prescriptive. But certainly, yeah, you're right. The cognitive behavioral therapy, which is very helpful, and I'm a big fan, is in many ways prescriptive. Like, okay, you're thinking the wrong thoughts. But it's, again, we tend to shy away from you should do this type. Well, let's think about what are the consequences of thinking this way versus thinking another way. How do you feel when you're thinking this way versus another way? And then hopefully the patient will connect the dots and say, I certainly don't want to be thinking like this all the time. I'd like to be thinking more positive and so forth. So,
yeah, we touched on this at the very beginning of our conversation. I have a saying in one of my books that to bring the challenge to you before the challenge presents itself. When what we mean by that is deliberately construct things that are going to be scary and challenging for you, so that you can really face your fears and develop the capacities to handle that level of stress. And I learned this through Navy SEAL training, where we deliberately stress the crap out of ourselves with scary shit all the time, and through that process become more and more resilient. And I believe, my personal belief is that has allowed me to avoid life or my higher power from smacking me down with the very same lessons that I would have had to endure anyways for my own evolutionary, growth. And the reason I bring that up is because I want to ask you, whether you think kind of your higher power will present challenges that are specific to you as an individual, so that you get the right lessons. Yeah. And, back to that kind of relates to karma too. So you bleed off negative karma, or, evolutionary.
My personal religious belief is that, yes, these challenges are in some way tailored to you. And that's, again, that's sometimes really hard, because
it is hard, because you say, well, how could COVID have been tailored to me?
Yeah. Or, my wife's death, or, my father-in-law is terrible. Life's hard.
Life is hard.
It's really hard. I try to keep a hold of that hope that, look, this isn't the end. If I really believe, as I do, that life is a it's a test of our character, and we're meant to develop our ability to choose between good and evil, then to me it doesn't make sense that this is all there is. Right. There's something beyond this, that, okay, things are going to be better. That those challenges that were insurmountable during your life, that there's going to be some way around those, even if it doesn't happen in this life.
Right. Yeah, I choose to believe that as well. Maharshi and the this Indian sages would say that, when the moment of death is like waking up from a dream.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And then the real you is suddenly recognizes that you just had a dream of this life that we call life.
Yeah.
Just a pretty fascinating perspective. So we got to wrap up here, but what's your view on artificial intelligence and this kind of transhumanism push, right? Do you think that do you think that kind of merging of human mind with this technological, fantasy is going to make things better or worse when it comes to the human condition around anxiety, depression, happiness, or not?
Yeah. It's a good question, and I guess no one really knows the answer. I'll tell you my experience with AI. So the most common way I interact with artificial intelligence is through my phone.
Right.
And I frequently will ask. I have an iPhone, so it's Siri, right?
Uh-huh.
When I'm driving, if I need to call someone out, call so and so. And about 6 months ago, I was driving and by the way, if you've noticed, sometimes if you have more than one phone number for the person you're trying to call, Siri will prompt you and say, which one? Meaning, which one do you want to call, right? So about 6 months ago or so, I had two of my kids. I've got 5 kids. I had 2 in the back seat, ages 8 and 10. And for whatever reason, I got in my head at this time that I needed to call my wife. And I got in my head, I wonder if Siri's smart enough to figure out who my wife is. So instead of saying, call Sarah, I said, call my wife. Siri says, which one? And then I had to do a quick double take and tell my boys.
See if they were listening. Oh
but back to the seriousness of your question. I mean, I think certainly AI can be a helpful tool. I don't think it's going to, I was on a consulting call not too long ago with the group that was thinking about, well, can we just have AI perform the function of therapist?
Right.
And can you, because there's a shortage of therapists, and it'd be great if we could have more, it'd be cheaper if it's automated. And a big part of why therapy is helpful is just that there's another warm, helpful.
Right. There's the heart connection. Right.
Yeah, there's a heart. And I don't think you're going to imitate that with AI. Maybe if it gets really, really good, you could, but I don't think you're going to imitate that with AI. So certainly there are going to be limitations. In some contexts, AI is going to be probably very helpful.
Yeah. But, you said 10 years, like it's been 10 years since we've been getting more and more anxious and depressed. And it's about 10 years, a little over 10 years, 2011, 12, when social media kind of popped on the scene.
Yeah.
And now you have AI-driven social media, which is feeding up all this crazy negative stuff and, self-reinforcing, silos of information.
Yeah.
So I think that, if we project that into the future and magnify that, then you can probably extrapolate more and more, and so, but people are waking up to that now. I mean, your profession, all sorts of people, even the giants themselves, like Google and Apple and Amazon, not Amazon, but Facebook, they know this. They're just addicted to the profit, right?
Well, and a lot of people will make analogies with tobacco companies, right? So tobacco companies, it's pretty clear that they knew before the general public did that the products were harmful. And I'm convinced that's the case with many of these social media companies. So you're right. And this 10-year, especially for younger people,
right,
their depression rates and anxiety rates really started to take off between 2010 and 2015, when 90+% of the population had a supercomputer that they walk around with in their hand, and it was linked to these social media feeds, where it's a very different way of interacting than we've done for hundreds of thousands of years, face to face. So I am convinced that social media is a big culprit, especially for teenagers and young adults. If you're 40s and you jump on social media, and so it's probably not the best thing to do, and there's other things you could be doing with your time. 20 minutes here and there is not going to be terrible, but if you're young people especially, the data it's really damning that social media and so many of these kids really spend 8 hours on their phone.
I know.
I've got 2 teenagers, and we were driving home from camp. I was giving a ride to someone else, and I just they got their phones back after the camp. They were excited to look at them, and I just asked hey, check your screen time. What is your average screen time minutes per day? And it was something like 8-9 hours. That's like 1.5 full-time jobs, right? Like that's a lot of time that you could be spending doing other things, developing a talent, playing a musical instrument, something like that. I mean, and again, not all phone time is bad. It's
for
FaceTime, calls, especially the ability to connect with. My wife and I, our parents are thousands of miles away. That's a great aspect too, but the social media aspect, it's a very, very different way of interacting with the world, and overall seems to be causing some serious harms.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch that, because, like you said, they're so baked into the technology that just saying to them, hey, you're going to feel a lot better if you just put your phone down for, 3 or 4 hours a day and get out in nature. They simply can't do it. And that's why we get back to free will. It's almost like they've lost their free will because
there's an addictive aspect to
so
it.
Addicted
you get the same reaction if you tell the patient who has an alcohol issue, you're going to feel a lot better if you put your bottle of booze down.
Right.
That's not the... You need something more than just telling them to put their bottle. So there is an addictive aspect to this, and many of the studies they'll look at. You have 2 groups. One, you tell them to restrict social media use. The other, you don't tell anything. And then the people that restrict social media use, they almost always score better in psychological outcomes after. But there's a kind of a week period or so where they're almost going through a withdrawal period, and then they're like, I'm anxious. I got to see my phone. But after about a week or so, that kind of passes into a different phase where, their psychological well-being, their mental health, and so forth is better.
Yeah, this is amazing. A great conversation. I could talk forever about this stuff with you. But so your book, Purpose: What Evolution and Human Nature Imply About the Meaning of Our Existence, came out this summer. Congratulations! So people can find that on Amazon or wherever. And what about just following you? Do you use social media yourself, or how can people reach out to you or just learn more?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn. That's kind of my only social media at this point.
That's a good one.
It's bad for business, but good for mental health. So
okay.
So yeah.
So reach out to you on LinkedIn.
Sure. Yeah, that'd be great.
Terrific, Sam. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Mark,
keep up the great work.
Thank you very much.
Hoo-yah.